Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's topic is photo post processing, to mask or not to mask, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Aditya Panda. Thank you so much for being here today, Aditya. Over to you.
Thank you, Brooke. And hello, everyone. I hope you've been having a great week. Um, so it's the off season in India now, as you all know, and we expedition leaders have a nice break, a much earned a break from leading trips back to back, and that gives us time to sit at home, go through our hard drives, find our pictures, and start working on them. And one thing that we've been noticing is that the speed at which new processing techniques are developing and the way in which artificial intelligence is taking over, things that we did routinely, it's just fascinating. And what that's done is that not only is that constantly changing the way in which we work on our pictures, but it's also letting us go back to pictures that are really old, pictures that we had perhaps even given up on, and to start working on them in different ways using the new tools that we have today. So that and a request from my last webinar, which was also on post-processing, um, led me to decide on this subject for today, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it. Now, before I get into the webinar, I would like to reintroduce myself.
Aditya,
And
could you please share your screen really fast? We don't see your screen yet.
Oh, sorry. Can you send me a screen share request again? Sorry about that. All right. I was saying that I wanted to introduce myself for those of you who are attending one of my webinars for the first time, and for those of you who haven't traveled with me in the past. My name is Aditya Panda, and I have been leading NatHab expeditions in India since 2016. I primarily lead our tiger expeditions, which are the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, India Tiger Quest, and as a Photo Pro expedition leader, I lead our India Tiger Photo Expedition, which is a tiger focused photography oriented trip. When I'm not leading expeditions, I am based in eastern India, in a state called Odisha, and I focus my energies on the conservation of tiger and elephant landscapes in this part of the country. Now, back to the topic. So, I've done a fair number of webinars on post-processing now, and a lot of you must have attended those. And those webinars were not webinars where we spoke much about masking. For those of you who work on your post-processing using any of the Adobe softwares, be it Lightroom or Lightroom Classic or Adobe Camera Raw, um, you know, um, even if you've been working on them for a while, there has always been some sort of masking option or the other that has been available with these softwares. But earlier, these options were fairly rudimentary. They were quite tricky. You needed to paint around, your subject or whichever part of your picture that you wanted to mask with a brush, and it was really difficult to get those to be very accurate. And a lot of people needed to first work on their raw images on Lightroom or Camera Raw, and then go into Photoshop for more advanced masking edits. But that has now changed with the arrival of artificial intelligence in our everyday lives. Um, Lightroom has not been late to catch up. And now you have some really good masking options right inside Lightroom, which really make it unnecessary in most cases to even go into Photoshop. In fact, as a wildlife photographer, I myself have stopped using Photoshop since years now. And as a photographer, I also was sort of reluctant to do a lot of masking, you know, because there are also ethical questions about the authenticity of a picture on which masking has been applied, or at least the way it used to be applied in the past. And we will talk about that later in today's webinar. But to start with, what exactly is masking? Um, when you post process a picture on any post processing software, what we do most of the time is what you would call global adjustments. You make adjustments, you might adjust the exposure, the contrast, the highlights, the saturation, the sharpness, and those adjustments apply to the entire image. They apply to every pixel on the image. And if you're doing just very basic enhancements, very basic color correction, um, those adjustments are more than sufficient. Um, you can get great pictures without masking. You can, especially if a picture straight out of the camera is a really good picture to start with, and the camera is capable of fairly high dynamic range, you can do almost everything you need to do with it without getting into masking. But what masking does is that it allows you to make very local adjustments to individual parts of the pictures. You can make general adjustments for the picture as a whole, but you can make the eyes of an animal pop out, for example, or if an animal is in a tricky light situation where say it's been silhouetted against a water body that's reflecting a setting sun or a rising sun. Those are tricky situations where it's now possible to get very accurate and very easy adjustments made individually to different parts of the picture to create a very pleasing, very detailed final image, where you can really get the best out of that image. Uh, Masking is something that landscape photographers typically tend to use a lot, and fashion photographers, portrait photographers, people who are into highly creative photography, where there's a lot of room for artistic freedom. They have always used masking, but wildlife photographers, by and large, wanting to represent natural history in an accurate fashion, yet in an aesthetically pleasing fashion, have often been reluctant to start using masking. But there is still a lot of scope for using that as a creative tool in wildlife photography. And it allows us to process different elements of a picture differently. It allows us to bring attention to key features of our subject. It could be feather detail in a bird, or eyes of a big cat, or color detail. It allows us to, with wildlife photography, we do not have the luxury that studio photographers have. We have no control over the lighting. We have no control over the immediate environment of the subject that we are photographing. If an animal decides to get into, a really busy cluster of bushes or twigs, there's very little that you can do. But using masking, using AI tools that are now available with us, we can control those things to a fair extent without being dishonest about the final product, about what we are conveying. And of course, as with any situation in nature where things are not under our control, the color of the sky, for example, can make or break a picture. And masking allows us to have greater control over those kind of elements in our photography. Now, but where do we draw the line? I mean, it's not without reason that the word Photoshop turned into almost a bad word. It has come to in popular discourse, it has come to mean faking pictures literally. And in wildlife photography, we do not want to do that unless we are openly stating that our pictures are purely creative, artistic communication, and not really natural history photography. You would not want to do things with your picture that would make the end product, not entirely honest. So you wouldn't want to use tools like this to manipulate a picture to be very different from what you actually saw or experienced. I mean, it's fine to do that as long as one is confessing to it, but generally in wildlife photography, that's not considered, a really great thing to do because wildlife photography is a lot about documentation. It's a lot about accurate depiction of what happens in nature. It is a lot about accurate depiction of wildlife behavior, of environment, and of natural history. So, one has to draw the line somewhere, especially if one is claiming to be photographing wild animals in their natural habitat. So, in my personal view and in rules that I follow when I'm taking my pictures and when I'm post processing my pictures, those are the things I aim for. I have a few very basic rules that I do not break. I intend to give an honest representation of the subject to my audience. My picture must be accurate in terms of natural history. I like to keep my post processing and my adjustments limited to enhancing the picture, not manipulating it. That's, there's a fine line differentiating the two. I want to be able to get the best out of that raw file that comes out of my camera's memory card. And just like you would do in a dark room with a slide film or negative film, I try to get the best out of it without um, without changing the genuine content of what I shot. And to be very honest, with the kind of AI tools that are becoming available now, it's very tempting to sort of, you know, be a little flexible with these principles. But it's highly tempting to use these tools, and some of what these tools do can actually be questionable. For example, and I'll cover this in a different webinar probably on AI tools in post processing. But for example, in this picture, I could entirely easily remove the overhanging branches at the top of the picture so that I could have a clear blue sky. But all the pixels that then would represent the sky where the branches are now would actually be fake pixels. They would be things that never existed. So would I do a thing like that? Um, I've come to concede to the fact that it's okay to do that when you have mildly distracting elements. Say, for example, if you have a picture of a bird with an absolutely clean background, and there is one distracting twig that is poking into the frame from the sides. Then if you erase that using an AI tool or using an eraser tool, then are you in any way manipulating the picture to be dishonest about the natural history documentation that it gives? That ultimately boils down to a personal call. But if I did something like that, I would always, while publishing work like that, especially on social media and places like that, I would definitely admit to it. And of course, if you enter your pictures in wildlife photography competitions, they have really strict rules about these things, and they will ask you for a raw file of your picture, and some of them can be quite intolerant of excessive use of AI or excessive manipulation or excessive changes that go beyond a certain point. So, this picture of this tigress that I took in Kanha National Park in central India on a Grand India Wildlife Adventure. This picture was taken in fairly challenging light conditions. It was late in the day, just an hour before noon. So the sky was pretty washed out. The light was harsh and coming from almost overhead. And there were harsh highlights and deep shadows. And I used masks to try and get different elements of the picture, different portions of the picture into perfect exposure, so that the overall result ended up being a picture with pretty high dynamic range and fair exposure at all parts. Had I not used masking tools, then in order to brighten up the tigress, I would have had to completely wash out the skies. So that's how you can use masking without actually manipulating your pictures. So enough about ethics now. Let's quickly go over the basic masking tools that are available on Lightroom. And after that, we shall go into a live editing session and work on some pictures. So there are a few basic kinds of masks that you will find on Lightroom, and I'll show you where to find them. There is the subject mask, there is the sky mask, there is also a background mask, there's an object mask now, there's linear gradient, radial gradient, there's a brush that you can use to paint wherever you want to mask manually with your mouse. And of course, you can use an eyedropper tool to pick up a color range or a luminance range to specifically process. Most of these, like the linear gradient, radial gradient, brush, luminance, and color range tools have always been available on Lightroom and Camera Raw and most such photo post-processing softwares. But with the arrival of AI, now you can have subject detection and sky detection and background detection and object detection, which happen very easily and very quickly and fairly accurately, thanks to AI that's now available with our softwares. Um, Subject mask, as the name indicates, chooses um, the subject in the picture by identifying the most contrasty, the most in focus pixels. And it's fascinating how accurately, a software can tell from a bunch of pixels, which essentially make a picture, which part of the pixels are actually showing the subject. Here I just clicked, create new mask, and chose subject, and it took a while. The software took a while to uh, make its mind up, and when it did, it chose the tiger perfectly. Now, it doesn't always do that perfectly, but most of the time it does it perfectly. And when it doesn't do it perfectly, I'll tell you how we can deal with that. Similarly, you have a sky mask, and that is a mask that works very accurately most of the time. And Lightroom does a great job of selecting just the sky so that you can make specific adjustments to it. Then you have your background mask, which is basically, an inverse of the subject mask. The background mask causes Lightroom to choose everything in the picture except the subject. And then there's also now the object mask. The object mask actually lets you choose, narrow down um, a specific part of the picture, and Lightroom will then look for an object or a subject within that portion of the picture. And here I just drew a rectangle around the tiger's head, and Lightroom immediately uh, managed to identify the object in that rectangle. Um, there is linear gradient, which is, you can choose um, a part of the picture. You just draw a gradient on it using straight lines, and you can make selective adjustments there. And there is also radial gradient, where you select a radial part, a circular part, or an oval part of the picture and make selective adjustments there. Um, Besides these, there are also these fine-tuning tools that are available. There is a brush that you can use to make specific changes, to add or subtract from what the software has chosen to fine-tune that. And then you can, as I was mentioning earlier, use an eyedropper tool to pick up a specific color range or a specific light range, which is called a luminance range, and make adjustments to those. So, without further ado, let's get into Lightroom and start to um, test these. Now, I haven't worked on the pictures that I'm about to show you. Let's start with this tiger here. I haven't worked on these pictures because I don't want to do rehearsed steps here. I want you to see how it's done for real, and what it is like to work on it. Now, here we have a tigress, again in Kanha National Park, on a beautiful spring morning. There are shafts of light coming down through the morning mist that is still there. And, the tigress is in the shade of sal trees. And there is light behind her on the road, but she herself is almost entirely in the shade. So, pretty challenging photographic conditions in that sense, in that if I only applied global adjustments, that is, adjustments without using masks, then I would still end up getting a nice picture, but the tigress would be, well, just a silhouette. You would not really see a lot of detail in her. So let's start. We shall start by making our regular global adjustments, and then later to fine tune we shall get into masks. So let's start by cropping the picture to get a nice composition. I shall use a 4:5 aspect ratio because eventually I'll post this picture onto Instagram, and Instagram only allows 4:5 aspect ratio for vertical pictures. Otherwise, my preferred aspect ratio for most pictures is 3:2, which is a more natural sensor ratio. So let's get, yeah, let's get her in the rule of thirds grid. So yeah, that looks nice. If I did it in 3:2, I would get more of the canopy, and that would be nicer. So might as well do it in 3:2. That would make for a nicer frame. You see, I like the way in which that big sal tree behind the tigress is sort of framing the picture. All right, we have cropped it. Now let's work on the exposure. Our subject is pretty dark, so we might want to add some exposure. But you see, as I add exposure, it's also causing the background to blow up, but we'll fix that later. After exposure, let's add some contrast. Um, Again, keep in mind that while making any adjustments through the course of your post-processing, you should always keep an eye on your histogram. Make sure that none of your adjustments are causing any colors or light to clip, and that these two warning triangles at either end of your histogram do not light up in any color. Let's see. Some good contrast on that. Now I'm going to pull down the highlights in order to get more detail out of the background. And shadows. Let's add some shadows because the background is pretty blown out now. Now we shall work on our whites and blacks. Making sure all the while that I'm not clipping anything. See, as I'm pulling the blacks down to get more detail out of my background, the tigress is getting darker and losing detail. We'll work on that later. Let's just do, let's fix the white balance. I'm using the eyedropper tool for choosing a white spot on, a spot on the tiger which should look white, and that will help me get a natural looking white balance. There you go. Add some vibrance. A little bit of saturation. Maybe some vignetting. We shall come into sharpening later after we do our local adjustments using masks. I'm removing chromatic aberrations and enabling lens correction. Right. So here we have a picture that is possible. It works. It's not a bad picture. It's much better than the raw file. This is what the raw file looked like. And now with global adjustments, we have made it look much better. There's a lot more detail on the tiger. But let's make it even better. Now here is where I choose my masks. This is the masking menu. And as you can see, there are several options here to create new masks. There is a subject mask, which automatically selects, as Adobe explains, a prominent part of the photo with the power of AI. Works well with people and animals. And there is no sky in this picture really, so we can't try it on this. We'll try that on some other picture. But that's your sky selection button, and this one selects the background. So you can also choose objects, or you can just use a brush to manually select what you want to select. And you can use a radial gradient if you want to a linear gradient, I'm sorry, if you want to linearly choose a part of the picture that you want to edit separately. And then there is the radial gradient, and there is also range here, which lets you choose color and luminance, as I was mentioning. Here, let's first start by choosing background, and let's see how well a job Lightroom does. Takes a while, uses a lot of processing power, artificial intelligence. There, it's chosen the background based on what the software thinks, but the software thinks that this tree is not part of the background and that the space between the tiger's legs are not part of the background. So what we shall do now is that we shall add using a brush. And once you select a brush, it's important to choose the right size of brush and try and choose as small a brush as possible to make it as accurate as you can, and then paint over there. So now we have managed to add the tree to the selection, and now we shall attempt to add this bit between the tiger's legs, and we need a smaller radius brush for that because it's a very narrow patch. There. Right. Now we want the background to be less blown out, so we shall reduce exposure a bit and make it more balanced. You can see it's already looking a lot more balanced. Um, we would also probably like to reduce the highlights even more and see how that helps, if that helps. Maybe not. Now there is an effect called dehaze that you would normally use to add contrast and remove haze from a picture. But from a picture like this, moody picture with beautiful mist in the morning, I wouldn't like to remove haze. I might instead prefer to actually add some haze. And you can create that effect by reducing, by pulling back the dehaze slider, on the negative side. Let's see if we can add some contrast in the background. And let's see if adding shadows uh, helps or not. All right. So this is what we did to our background. Now let's create another mask to work on our tiger. So what I'm going to do now is, if you create a number of masks, if you create a number of different masks, it's easy to, make your sidebar look cluttered and not be able to find one mask from the other. So what you can actually do is you can name mask one to say uh, tree edition, and I'll create another mask, and instead of subject I'll choose object because I don't want the software to think that the tree is also part of the subject, which is what it did the first time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose object, and here you see in object there are two options. You can either draw a rectangle around what you think the object should be, or you can paint around it using the brush. I prefer the rectangle, and I'm going to draw a rectangle around the tiger and let Lightroom do its AI magic again. And as usual, it's going to take some time. But it has done a really far more accurate job now of detecting the subject. Um, sorry, the object. Oops. Now with our tiger, remember she was a little underexposed and looked like a silhouette. So we shall add just a little bit of exposure. Um, pull down the highlights a bit to get the details out. Add a little bit of contrast, some saturation. And we want our subject, our tiger, to look nice and sharp. So we'll add a little bit of texture just to the tiger without affecting the rest of the picture. And use the clarity slider to add some more of that. And maybe a little extra sharpness. Not a lot. And if you notice, I've not been doing any noise reduction at this stage. And there. Um, we shall now we are done with our masks for the moment. Had the tigress been closer to the frame, I could have also done something else, which is to use a radial gradient to choose her select her eyes and make them, reduce, pull out shadows a little out of the eyes and add some extra texture and sharpness to the eyes to make them pop out a bit. But right now, in this sort of situation, this sort of a frame, that's not really necessary. Now we shall go back to our global adjustments and fine tune a little more. Uh, I'll pull down overall exposure a little bit to uh, give that, you know, early morning golden light through the mist kind of feel. Um, and I shall add overall sharpness now, which is here. And every time I add sharpness, I reduce the radius to the minimum. So here we have the final product. Well, almost the final product. What I would do afterwards is to use this button here, the denoise button, which uses AI to do a really good job of denoising pictures, which is far better than manually doing it. And the only reason I'm not doing that now is because it uses up all the processing power of the computer, and it takes a good 5-6 minutes to work on a single picture. I actually hit denoise and go make myself brew myself a mug of coffee, and when I come back, it's often still not entirely done. So that is something that we're going to leave for later. But now just look at the before and after uh, results of this picture. This is, of course, after. This is what we started out with. This is what the picture looked like. Flat, um, lacking contrast, um, a lot of brightness in the background, which is fine, but very little detail on the actual subject, which is the tiger. Now, using masks, what we have managed to do is that we have managed to get beautiful color and detail out of our subject. At the same time, we have done justice to that amazing background of late winter, early spring morning in the central Indian highlands, and ended up with a beautiful picture of a tiger in its habitat in really magical light. What started out as bad light has ended up being magical light. So we are running out of time. So I shall not go all the way into post-processing another picture, but what I shall do is I shall use this example. I mean, this would have been another nice picture to work on. This is a picture of a great pied hornbill from Kaziranga National Park, which we also visit on the Grand India Wildlife Adventure. But again, here you have challenging light. The subject is half in shadow, half in light. It's got a bright background, and the subject itself is a fairly dark bird. So I will not be able to work on this picture through the course of this webinar because it's going to take time. But I will show you the use of the radial gradient and how you can use that to make the eyes of your subject pop. Now you see in this picture, our bird has a black face and its eye is a dark red eye, and that portion of its face is in the shade. And that is why the eye doesn't really stand out. So what I would do here, now when I zoom in, you see that it's actually got a pretty nice looking eye. So what I'll do here is use a radial gradient, and I'm going to draw around the eye using the iris or the pupil as the center here. And you see, be it the radial gradient or be it any brush that you use in masking, there are two circles that you see. There is a central circle, two concentric circles, a central circle and a larger circle around it. The central circle is actually where you have the impact, where the brush really is. Um, the outside circle actually indicates the area in which the brush's feathering will be. So uh, you can choose how much feathering you want. If you add more feathering, then there is a more gradual and natural looking change in appearance from the center of the brush to the to the circumference to the of the brush and beyond. If I use smaller feather, then that change becomes more well rigid, more sharp, and that doesn't look very natural. So we use a nice large brush, a large feather, about 70% or so, and I'll make our radial selection a little larger than the eye of the hornbill. And what I'm going to do now is I'll pull up the shadows from the hornbill's eyes so that the darkness goes, and you can instantly see how you can see more light and color in the eye of the hornbill. I'll probably add some contrast and maybe play around a little bit with the exposure and see if, oh yes, it does make it better. And then we shall probably add some saturation to make that red pop out a little. Not too much. It's very tempting to go overboard with all these adjustments, and then you end up with a picture that looks absolutely unnatural and gaudy. I'll add some texture to the eye and also boost up the clarity to bring some more contrast in it. And I'll add sharpness. Now, I'll keep the picture zoomed in because we did not work on any other parts of the picture, but just to give you the example of radial gradient and do a before after, see what a difference it makes to the eye. Now, this is what it looked like originally. You can barely see the eye. And this is what it looks like now. So even when you zoom out of the picture, the eye stands out far more prominently than it did before. See, this is what it looked like before. You can almost not see the eye. And now, just with that one tiny adjustment, we managed to make the eye pop. So I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and I don't want to ramble on and not have time to answer your questions. And Brooke, I would love to hear what questions our audience has and try and answer them. Over to you.
Yes, Aditya, that was phenomenal. Thank you so much. I'm ready to log into my big backlog of photos and start editing myself. I feel so inspired. And we do have lots of questions today. Remember, everybody, if you want to go into your control panel, you could submit some additional questions there for about the next about 5, 6, maybe 7 minutes. I will ask you some additional questions. So, one of the first ones is Lightroom versus Lightroom Classic. Do you have a preference between the two? And which one were you using? And then last part of that, are you on a Mac or are you on a PC? So I guess the difference between the platforms and the computer processing platforms as well.
Right. Great. I'm on a Mac, and that's probably why my computer is still working today. If you've heard of all the outage that's been happening with Windows machines, but yes, it's an interesting question about Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. Um, the key difference between the two is that Lightroom Classic is more of a hard drive or individual computer based version of Lightroom. So all the pictures that if you're using Lightroom Classic, you basically store and access your pictures from your computer. The pictures are stored in the computer's hard drive. But I use Lightroom. The version was earlier called Lightroom Creative Cloud. Now it's just called Lightroom. And what this does is that it stores all my pictures in a cloud server system, and be it on my laptop or be it on my iPhone, I can access my Lightroom library from anywhere in the world. I don't need to carry my hard drives with me. If they're on my Lightroom library, if I'm sitting on an airplane, of course, if I'm on an airplane, I need to download the pictures first because there's no internet. But wherever I am, I can just sit on my phone, go to my Lightroom, and work on my pictures. And it's the same way with my laptop. If I just carry my laptop anywhere with a Wi Fi connection, I can access my entire Lightroom library without having to carry my hard drives with me. So that's the key difference. And yeah, as I was saying, I use Lightroom, not Classic.
Perfect. We have another question here, essentially asking the sequence of you editing your photo. So why in this particular case did you start with the background first? Is that your normal way of going about photo editing?
Now that really varies from individual picture to picture, because in that particular picture, the background was my biggest concern. Um, it was blown out, and it needed more work than the subject did. So that's why I chose the background. In a picture where the background would have been, uniformly exposed and balanced, but the subject would have had problems, I would have started working with the subject first. So that varies from picture to picture.
That makes total sense. The picture dictates the order of your masking. I get it. Another one here. So somebody plans on printing on metal, getting metal prints versus just like
Right.
on a canvas or anything. Should should we consider editing differently for those type of raw files if we are printing on metal, or is it the same process, or what is your experience with that?
Well, I personally have never printed on metal before, but I would assume that you would edit your picture in a similar fashion to what you would do to print on glossy paper. Um, and of course, when you are printing like that, you take your file to a print shop, and there needs to be some final adjustments done because the print shop's computer monitor is calibrated to the printer there. So no matter what you do, they're going to mess with it a little bit just to make sure that the colors come out accurately. But I would advise that if you're printing on metal, process it in a way that you would do for printing on glossy paper, not matte paper.
Oh, that's a great tip. And I think we have time for one more here. Is also a Lightroom Classic versus Cloud
Mhm.
question here. And do you know if the same AI masking is available in both or just in what you showed us today, Lightroom?
No, it's available across the Adobe Raw photo processing platforms. So it's exactly the same thing that's available on Lightroom Classic as well as on Adobe Camera Raw, which is part of Photoshop. So the same AI platform is available on every Adobe Raw processing software.
Ah, perfect. That is the last question that we have time for today. So I would like to hand it back to you, Aditya, for any closing comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Brooke, and thank you to our wonderful audience. I hope you found today's webinar useful, and I hope it will help you not only be able to process your pictures, to improve the way in which you process your pictures, but also it'll make the whole thing more enjoyable. Thank you so much, and I really look forward to seeing you all again on another episode of Daily Dose of Nature.
Mm. Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today, Aditya. I know I feel inspired, and I hope that everybody else does too. And join us Monday for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. And keep an eye out for our Sunday e-news announcement. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.